Greetings, Internet. Today we're here with Roger Sharpe, who is very well known in pinball for saving pinball and being a very good pinball player. Even today, he was schooling me on dialed in, doing shots I know I could make after many hours of play, many hours of play. He did over 250 or 60,000 on that game.
I think it's 380, but we won't correct you.
All right, the bonus. I was still mesmerized because my high score was about 50, and I'm sixth in the state. So that puts things in perspective. Roger Sharpe. First, we are at IAAPA 2016 this year. What are the highlights of the show for you?
Oh, so far, I think obviously, we're looking at pinball. The fact that you have a couple of manufacturers on the floor showing some games. There's some virtual pinball as well that's on the floor. But I think, by and large, this show tends to be more for bigger attractions. So a lot of VR here today, a lot of 4D, 5D, and whatever else, inflatables, outdoors. You have a lot of carnival attractions. So for me, it's just kind of taking it all in and seeing either thematically what people are doing and what they're focused on, as well as what types of attractions can we see in the future when we either go to a theme park, when we go to a family entertainment center that may have a little bit more space. Maybe they're going to do a little bit something different with their laser tag or their miniature golf. So, it's this confluence of all these folks that are very much involved in amusement attractions. And then, the video games, Walking Dead, reissue or revisit, much improved with cruising. You have a new Daytona. So there's lots of product and a great deal of it with novelty redemption games, things that are bigger, bolder, better. So it's fun. It's kind of re-energizing every year when I come to this show and also the one in March, the amusement show, to see what everybody's pulling out of their hats.
So pinball has a good presence this year, very good presence as opposed to.
I think Stern has a nice booth. Obviously, Jersey Jack does. You have Medieval on the floor, so it's all looking good.
So things are pretty much trending up in pinball. You think we're still in an up cycle, so to say? Still.
I think it's a question of where anybody is. If you're in the inner city and they have embraced barcades, then you're seeing pinball. If you're somewhere on the outskirts, maybe there's some still lingering legal restrictions. Maybe pinball is not as apparent other than in people's basements and rec rooms and whatever else. But yeah, I think that the cycle has changed. I'd like to think that much of what PAPA has done, that Steve Epstein and I kind of created from scratch a couple of hundred years ago, as well as what IFPA has been able to do, is to really solidify and universalize the audience for pinball. And again, I know and I understand that it's more competitive based, but I think the socialization aspects of pinball, and whether you're playing in people's basements or if there are some locations that have enough games out and about and you're in a league or you're playing in a tournament, I think that those kinds of things have really kind of enriched the overall, not only experience of pinball, but the overall opportunity for businesses to embrace. And we were just talking as we were walking here, to embrace the opportunity to incorporate pinball into their businesses. So in terms of what you're doing, and you're approaching, these store owners and managers and whatever else, saying, "Hi, what about?" The fact that it's becoming a little bit more prevalent means that maybe they're willing to take that dead space and turn it into something that becomes a value added for their overall business, whether it's a restaurant or a bowling center. And I think that there needs to be more and more of that. The biggest hurdle, and not wanting to be a down to all of what I just said, is the technical support. And if I'm a location owner and an operator and I'm working on a split, whatever those percentages are, the amount of money that you're generating is really incidental compared to what your overall business is. So you have to actually see it as being something where I'm trying to bring in more people the way that I do with my darts or my pool table or my jukebox, whatever the case might be. And that becomes a challenge because if the game is down, it's not earning. And if you don't have the technical support and or expertise or the parts to get the game back up and running, suddenly, the $60 last week that you earned is $10 this week, and the immediate reaction is, oh, it's not working. Not that it's not working because it's broken, it's not working, nobody wants to play. Well, nobody wants to play because it was broken. Let's fix it.
Right.
And let's see if we can generate $80 next week. So the knee-jerk reaction tends to be, take it out, I'm done with it. And I think that is a daunting task. I've been around far too long. I think that, way back when most businesses, whether they be arcades or anything else, had a staff that could maintain games, even if it was Windexing down the screen on a video game and wiping away crud around joysticks. You wanted somebody to actually vacuum the carpet.
Right.
You want somebody to change a simple light bulb underneath,
a coin
jam,
glass,
a coin jam, whatever it might be. And I think just the idea of just simple maintenance is one thing. When something is not working, or you turn the sound down, there's a malfunctioning flipper. Ideally, you can address that. But the fact that we're dealing with a mechanical device makes it, again, a very real challenge for there to be further exponential growth of where pinball was 20 years ago,
right,
to where it can be. The opportunity is there. It really is. And I think that you are the classic example of why the industry has, I think, a brighter future when it comes to pinball, which is as an independent going in saying, would you like this? I'll take care of it. And if more and more people were like you, Tony,
right,
then we would see growth of pinballs.
Right.
Take it out of your own collection. Go buy a used game. Shop it. Put it out. I mean, I think that that's where the bootstrapping has to be for pinball to make more incremental inroads.
And they have to be played to stay alive. They can't just sit dormant. The game has to be played to work, right?
Well, and
in general,
if you're a tech or you have somebody working on your behalf, instead of just doing collections, they're also putting a coin in,
right,
or triggering a free game. Play the darn thing. See if it is working right. See if it's still level.
If you're watching this video and don't know, I'm a collector operator as of 5 years today. Skateboard record shop in Atlantic Beach called Young Loud Snotty. Put Batman Forever out. I was not a tech. I had someone help me fix things. I find after 5 years it's challenging enough to put the right game at the right location for the right amount of time, let alone the working on it. Foot's on the keeping the beat on the street. Hey, pinball's out. We have the pinball app, pinball map. We have Pinside. They have the pinball map there.
Sure.
I do the zine. I did it in print for the first few issues. I did thousands of issues. I hand distribute everywhere. And I heard, I found the zine, and I was my map around town, like Skillshot in Seattle. When I lived there, it was my treasure map. I went all around, and even though a lot of the games didn't work, I didn't care. It's still the adventure of, here's a dark bar, really dark and creepy bar that has a Dracula. Perfect. That's where it should be in Seattle. But yeah, but now I think it's easier than ever to get it out there. Like, hey, my game is out.
Right. Yeah, but again, I think that the biggest thing is if you're going around, and it should be on a weekly basis.
Right.
At worst case, it should actually be depending on the amount of traffic. All right, weekends are really busy. I'm going to be there Friday. When we set everything up, we're going to come back Monday.
Okay.
And after the weekend, when we check the game, make sure everything's okay, cash box and whatever else aside, it's a question of really taking care of the games. And I think that the part that's lost to the outside world is if I take care of it, maintain it, it's only going to appreciate the value. Think of, how we treat our cars.
Right.
If you take care of it, trading value is going to be better, regardless of miles. If you don't, and you're not changing your oil regularly, and you're not taking care of things, the little knock that you keep on hearing, and it's like, I'll take care of it, you take care of it, and you don't, and then suddenly a major part blows out. Well, it's the same thing with the pinball machine. And more importantly, it's the same thing with video. And you're not seeing as much video other than arcades bringing back games from the 80s that have been reconditioned, reconverted, and whatever else. You don't see a lot of stuff that's out there unless you're going into a Dave and Buster's type of environment.
Right.
Where the attractions are big, they are being maintained and managed, and ideally the steering wheel is working, the gas pedal is working, the gun mechanism is working, the joysticks are working. But those are the things that tend to impede the success and popularity of coin-operated music games in general.
So to keep the player intrigued, see, I'm a tournament player, so my intrigue is different than, like, high score is different than the average player that either they like an extra ball or they want a replay. What is your philosophy in the replay extra ball paradigm?
I mentioned before that I started playing pinball in Wisconsin. Wisconsin was, and I believe still is, an add-a-ball state. So for me, specials really never meant anything. It was always getting that extra ball so that you could continue on to try to turn a game or whatever the objectives were. If you go back historically, Bally designs from the mid-70s, many of them featured inline targets. So if I'm playing, I don't know, an 8-ball deluxe, I can get 5X and suddenly it's like I have a special, boom, I got a free game. Well, and I didn't finish anything, didn't do anything. So I think some of it is just the layout. There used to be the in quotes gift of a ball draining out the out lane and suddenly the special is lit. It's kind of a slap in the face. I've always thought, as a designer or otherwise, that it'd be nice if there is something as value, whether it's an extra ball, whether it's a special, that it's something that I should be able to achieve on the playfield in some fashion. So on the economics of it,
Right.
and this may run counter to what many people would like to think or believe. The average used to be that I was at Williams Valley Midway for a number of decades. You're giving away about 20% on replay. Let's use a round number. The game does $100 a week. Giving 20% on replay just in terms of where the settings are. I'm giving about another 5% on match.
Right.
Which doesn't exist anymore per se. I'm giving away 25%. If the game does $100 a week, I've given away $25. Suddenly that game's done $75 a week. If I'm on a split, that means that I'm splitting $37.50 if it's a 50-50 split for what ostensibly might have been a $3,000 or $4,000 investment. And the games are more costly. You start working that out, and suddenly I have to keep that game in operation, functioning for 2 years to make back my investment. So by the sheer math of it, turn off the match. It's still there, but maybe it's 1%.
Right.
So it's not 5. Get rid of replay. Because if anything, philosophically, it's the same as a video game. If I played that video game and I have reached a particular point, whatever type of game it is, I've extended. I got a new life. I got 30 seconds more. Whatever it is, it's an extension of the game. You're not winning a free game. All you're winning is an extra Pac-Man because you finished off the board. Whatever it might be. Pinball, for whatever reason, I guess, felt that the only way to interest and intrigue players was to say, hi, here is this attraction where you can win a free game. I've heard, and not wanting to get off target to the question, I've heard some comments about, I don't know about dialed in, it's not a license. And it's like, really? Have we gotten to the point where a game has to be a license, regardless? Whether you like Metallica, don't like it. Ghostbusters, like it, don't like it. Whatever it might be. And just using those two examples because they're on the floor. But have we gotten to the point where a pinball has no value unto itself unless it's a license attached to it, and we can't enjoy it just for the sake of what it is? And as I've joked back to people who have commented, I said, but it is a license. And they've looked at me and said, it's a Pat Lawler license. And maybe someday we'll see a Steve Ritchie license and a George Gomez license. Because if you look historically at what we as a company, Williams Bally, was able to do, and I was there from '88 until, well, past '99 when we shut down pinball, some of our best games were not necessarily licensed things. Medieval Madness is a classic example. Who would have thought that a $4,000 game at some point in time, almost 20 years later, would cost you $15,000? I mean, it's insane. And now, again, with the remake, and I think the remake is incredible, it's priced righter.
Right.
I still have problems with the overall cost of what pinballs are today. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that a license unto itself gets the attention. If you like that music group, if you like that movie, that TV show, that personality, whatever it might be, the game has to stand on its own merits. And I think that, for some people, maybe that's lost, where they're not willing to consider pinball above and beyond the coat of paint. And that's somewhat depressing to think that the ideology might exist out there, that, pinball doesn't have the strength and the wherewithal to at least intrigue you to the sense of, let me just check it out and see. So I'm hoping that Jack has success. I think that he will. I think it's a well-executed, crafted game, incredible depth, good flow, and that's what we kind of look for in a pinball machine. We want it to be something that is somewhat easy to understand and difficult to master, and for everybody, depending on their levels of pinball expertise, it's making a shot you've never made before can be sufficient. Getting a score you've never got before should be sufficient. And then, hopefully advancing to the point where maybe you become a little bit more proficient in what it is that you're doing.
Right, I like that as opposed to the winning a replay. I had once in 5 years, a lady asked me in the arcade location in Jacksonville, Video Game Rescue, she said, do any of these pay out?
Right.
And then it dawned on me later on, I'm like, yeah, freaking replay, what the heck?
Yeah, but
they all, technically.
There's a period of time where you did have bingos.
Right.
So there were knockoff switches, and I think that was, the mentality that we have to do something. I mean, what's your preference? Do you prefer replays or extra balls?
I want tournament settings. I want to get better, but extra ball. I've been moving towards extra balls on my games because I run IAAPA tournaments at many of my locations. Okay. So I linger the settings. I keep them tournament for like a week, and then I gradually turn them a little easier, or I sometimes just turn everything close to back what it was, but I keep it challenging.
So what did you think when we did, and I'll use the collective we, when we did buy-ins? So you could buy in for an extra ball on Star Trek, or on Judge Dredd,
now Judge Dredd, I gotta make a point on
about
that.
Super Game.
Oh, right. But Judge Dredd, the pricing didn't make sense to me. Okay. Paying 50 cents more for a multi-ball, it was okay. I would have.
It was a different execution,
but I liked it. It does work though. It does work though because I noticed that. For my audits and things like that, I'm like, okay, people are using it. And then No Fear, I love unlimited extra ball.
Right.
I love it because, first of all, it's a different high score other than the 3-ball.
Right.
So it's its own different realm. And then two, it does affect it.
Yeah,
some people just like to keep going.
Right. See, and the games are not as simplistic as they once were. So if you want to get to, and we'll use Star Trek Next Gen as an example, I mean, if you want to get to the Final Frontier, an extra ball will help. Forgetting about whether or not there was a buy-in, which there was.
Right.
In the old days, if you got all the green targets, all the red targets, all the A, B's, and C's, and whatever it might have been, it was much more rudimentary. So it didn't necessarily make sense to have a buy-in, obviously, but it absolutely made sense to get an extra ball so that I could finish out the rack of pool balls. I don't want to start all over again. It's kind of like going back to the original days of video games where I got started all the way from the beginning because I died over here before I got to a safety place on Zelda. So I'm playing all of this all over again by rote memory recall to get to the point where I was before, to start all over again so I can keep on going. And I think with pinball, you want to have the continuity of what it is that you're doing, where it's like, oh God, if I only had like one more ball instead of getting replay.
Right.
So that's again, that's some of my mindset when it comes to.
I like it and I appreciate it on every game that it's on. Like Demolition Man.
Right.
Roadshow. Roadshow's it makes sense. What was the genesis of that, Williams? Who were the people behind like making that happen? That said, "Hey, we want to."
For buy-ins.
Yeah.
It was a question of trying to elevate earnings. You know, if you think of what the time frame was around Mortal Kombat and NBA Jam and NFL Blitz and other games from that era, video games were doing incredibly well, and pinball needed to do something to kind of spike earnings. So, you know, let's change it from, you know, there's a big debate as to, you know, whether or not we could raise the price of games from 25 cents to 50 cents. There was talk about going to $1, which I was adamantly opposed to. So the idea of having a 50-cent game and then being able to buy, whether it was a quarter or an extra 50 cents, buy an extra ball made sense. Suddenly that 50-cent game is a $1 game.
Right, because
Or
then
it's
you can get
or it's $2.
yeah, then you get the $1 and beyond.
Right.
Like how far can you really take it? And that's why I like the philosophy of an Add-A-Ball, which has been around. Was it around earlier than the 90s?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's been around and it's.
Gottlieb wanted doing Add-A-Balls specifically for Wisconsin.
Right.
So if you go back to the mid-'60s, there were Add-A-Ball versions of various games, as well as replay versions of them.
And the Add-A-Ball.
So the Add-A-Ball maxed out at 10, typically.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen that. It helps more than hurts in the grand scheme of things. Is that right, or what is your view of, you know, economically as an operator? How?
I think it helps the player because it allows you to have, again, some sustainability of that experience for that particular game that you're playing, where it's like, wow, you've done something you've never done before, achieved a certain level, and now you keep on doing it. Where the game doesn't max out, and these days, by and large, the games with the capacity that they have, memory-wise, they don't necessarily max out. Where, all right, now what do I shoot for? I've done all of that. You know, great. I got the targets to reset, but they're meaningless. So I think that, you know, from an economic standpoint, I go back to what I just said before. If you're going to give away 10% on replay,
Wow.
you're giving away $10 out of 100.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what it buys you, per se. I think if anything, it takes away whatever the psychology is of running a business. You know, there are certain days where you go to the grocery store where there's specific products that are marked down. There's a reason for that. They're trying to incentivize you to buy it.
Right.
Maybe they're overstocked. It's not like they're losing money on that head of cauliflower for 39 cents, which is usually 99 cents. It means that they got a boatload of it and they got to move it because
They have a certain time frame. Yeah.
Right. So, I guess, and again, maybe that is stretching the analogy, but it's the same premise when it comes to any type of, you know, entertainment. You know, I can go to a movie in the afternoon and it costs less than if I go at night. Well, they're trying to get families in the seat. They're still running the darn movie. They're still paying back to the studios for being able to have that movie. So, you know, if there are things that you can do on a time basis where it's not disruptive to your audience,
Right.
the bigger thing, and I've always believed this, I think it's a question of how you set your extra ball levels and or your replay levels. I've always believed that for an extra ball game, or an Add-A-Ball game, if you will, you want about 30% of the players to be able to achieve at least getting one extra ball
Okay.
off of score.
Right. That's what I'm wondering because I don't like.
Depending on what your settings are on the play field.
Yeah, I like it skill based as opposed to
Right. So
the
if I
rent,
play, I don't know, Evil
percentage.
Knievel, and I have to, you know, knock down the drop target bank twice in order to like the extra ball after I've done the double bonus. And I think that's the way it works. I don't think I reversed it. Then yeah, I mean that's 10 shots basically to get to that point. So I think it's a question of analyzing and looking at each individual game and saying, all right, what is the scoring thresholds? what do I need as a replay? And we did that as a company with the replay boost.
Right.
The problem with that was if you were at a very skilled location,
Yeah.
suddenly you needed, 500 billion on giant mnemonic to even get close to forgetting about being on the board to get a replay. And if I'm an average player, I walk up and I see scores that are unattainable.
Right.
It's not fun for me because I walk away with my 50 million thinking I've done really, really good, but it's 500 billion. It's up there and it's like it's all relative.
Right.
So I think that, it means being much more attentive to, number one, the games that you place. Number two, where your post settings are and everything else. Whether it's factory settings, whether it's tournament settings or anything else. Seeing who your audience is and trying to design your settings for replays, extra balls, or whatever else accordingly. And if things change, there's always been settings in video games.
Right.
Defender, when it first came out, maybe had been at a 3. Well, when people mastered it better, if an operator was shrewd enough, maybe he jumped it to 5, 6, 7, or 8. Or Robotron, or Mortal Kombat, or anything else for that matter. So, pinball is something that needs some attentiveness.
Right.
If you're investing in it as part of your business. And if you're playing at home, set it up whichever way that you want. But I guarantee you, if you're at home and replays are meaningless, then the expectations that you have going out in the real world are going to be different, whether it's competitive or otherwise.
Right.
It's like, well, darn, I can get 300,000 on Adam's Family, no sweat at home, and here I'm struggling to get 40,000.
Right. That's a big paradigm shift.
It's a 3-ball game, and they set things up a little bit differently, and maybe the out lanes are not as forgiving as yours are. Maybe some of the other things that you're used to doing just don't happen. So I think again, it's a question of being more cognizant.
And with pricing, from what I hear, the philosophy is you can always go down, but you can never go up. Is that
Correct.
pretty much?
Yeah.
That's the rule of law. But with settings, it's kind of like you go with the flow of the location.
Right. You can't do it to the point where it's so disruptive to your regulars.
Right.
They walk in and it's like, hey, time out. What the heck have they done? It can't be that way. It has to be something that is a bit more subliminal.
Yeah, I've only had 2 customers complain about replay settings in 5 years. That's pretty good, right?
That's awesome.
Okay, and
Excellent.
I told him, hey, I'll sell you a pinball machine if you want. I mean, I'll give you a deal.
Now, what percentage of replays are you giving out?
Oh, it was default. It was default a little lower. I think 3 to 5, something like that. But like the settings weren't that high. They weren't. And those weren't even ones I set to tournament settings. Okay. And some of them, frankly, I just take the tilt off because I realize that. I mean, even if you wiggle the game around, there's still that intangible. You have to make all the shots. I mean, you could do all this, death save-ish stuff. I mean, you could be a ninja down there, but you have to make the shots. You have to get the jackpots, and they want to win something. I have an associate. He does I call crane games. I call it child gambling. Now it is what it is, but I don't. And I place games next to his. Like he'll have a location. He'll say, "Hey, I want you to put a pinball here," because strategically, if I have a pinball there and he has his cranes, well, I'm helping defend his territory, his spot. From another operator come in, they can put a crappy pinball and brand new cranes. Right. But yeah, it's I've seen that happen with him a good amount to where people complain about because that's the nature of his beast.
Sure.
Whereas me, I'm like, if someone complains about my payout, my replay ratio, I kind of take it as a badge of honor because I'm like, play better, buy a game.
Well, it'll be interesting, depending on the locations you have, is to put something in as an extra ball only.
Right.
And see what it does to your revenue.
And I'm doing that. I'm doing that gradually because I eventually want all of my games to be tournament light, not raw tournament settings. But like I said, some of them I don't even have a tilt bob on it because it's like a Mario pinball. Like, what kid wants to? It's bad enough Mario says, "More money, please," than for him to get a goose eggs or something, or want. Like, I like the kid. I like everybody to know that they're doing well or to know that they're doing bad. But in general, what do you think of the landscape of pinball and like in a nutshell? How was it like in the '70s? Like how it was there was a lot of production of games and it just like I have a '74 Sky Jump at my parents' house.
Great game.
They had a location in Wyoming, and they bought it new. And it's one of the ones they've kept. Okay. So I grew up with it in the house. So I grew up with this game. And
a major influencer on my life was Free Fall Sky Jump. If we're talking about the Add-A-Ball version, yeah, I mean that was the genesis for Sharpshooter. But the '70s were interesting only because Los Angeles opened up to pinball in '72 after 30 some odd years, and New York and Chicago and some other areas following suit. So you had this kind of explosiveness that lasted for at least a few years before video games came. So the changing over of technologies, electromechanics to solid state, had an impact and an influence societally. The movie Tommy had an impact.
And in this time, there were a lot of techs, right? Like, there's more and more techs to work on games.
Oh, sure.
That grew proportionately.
Right. I mean, you had mall game rooms. You had chains like Aladdin's Castle and others. There were places, not anymore, 7-Elevens that had games in them. So, the games really were proliferating at
practically everywhere.
Right.
Practically everywhere, and demographics. I'm fascinated about the demographics of now because it's really specific demographics that play right now. How were the demographics in the '70s? Was it kind of a
college? Yeah, I mean college campuses had game rooms. I went to Madison. There was a game room in the Rathskeller Student Union. I mean, bowling centers realized, hey, let's start doing some things and doing birthday parties and whatever else. Inner city, not as much, but suburban sprawl, which had started after World War II, really commanded, many more shopping centers and strip centers that had food courts, that had movie theaters, that had game rooms of some sort. Those are populated by pinball, by and large, along with some, of the initial iterations of video games before those pinball arcades became video game arcades. So the demographics were, I want to say probably teenage on up. A lot of bars, the happy hour world that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
and some of the other, drunk driving, DUI things that happened.
Right.
Discouraging a lot of what was taking place within bars and taverns. But, I'll take Chicago as an example. Any and every tavern that was worth its weight had a pool table, had a dart, and there was a changeover from steel tip to electronic darts, safety reasons and otherwise, and pinball and a jukebox. And if you go back a little bit further, payphones were all part of it. So that started disappearing, but there was a point in time where all the bars had that, and it was, before there was cable and before you had big screen TVs and come on in for Monday Night Football, you were going there to kind of bond and see some of your friends and kick back and have a cool one. So again, I think that was the age range by and large. You didn't have as many as maybe we do now, family entertainment centers. We're talking pre-Showbiz Pizza, pre-Chuck E. Cheese. So, the mall game rooms weren't necessarily mall game rooms for parties and things so much as it was a little bit of babysitting. So yes, Johnny, come with mommy, we're going shopping, and we'll get you a piece of pizza, and you can go play some games. And that was, I think more or less the mindset. So it tended to be a little bit older. I think one of the things I found somewhat fascinating, it really led to my whole starting with what eventually became PAPA, the scoring system and wanting leagues and whatever else was, the Valley Super Shooter tournament
So it's not under
back
any kind of
in
CEA.
'78. About 1 million players played. It was Aladdin's Castles. The top 20 came to Chicago for the finals in, I think it was February of that year. Age range, I remember the top 20 was 32 to 10 was one
The
woman.
question is
Wow.
So when you ask what the age range was,
Right. That's what I'm worried about. Demographics.
most of these, in quotes, local, regional champions were, mid to late teens, early 20s. 32-year-old, he was the old person. And the one gal
Wow.
was a 10-year-old boy. So it kind of offers a glimpse as to who that audience was back in the 70s.
Okay. That's fascinating locally because a two-time state champion is Atticus Palmer, who won in his teens. I believe it was last year and 2 years prior. But he there are really good team players that have good fathers that play. But so when there is exposure to pinball as a teenager, they will play.
Oh, sure.
If it's out there. How did pinball weather? What did it take for pinball to kind of weather the video games, the Pac-Man to the?
I think there was an overproliferation, oversaturation of really terrible games.
Okay.
From a number of companies that weren't even necessarily coin-operated amusement game companies, because suddenly you had home systems.
Right.
So you had Magnavox and you had Atari, and you had Mattel, and there were some other derivatives that were out there, and the games really weren't moving forward. I mean, the big challenge and argument was whether or not it was vector or raster graphics. I was like, really? Seriously? So, with that, you'd go into an arcade, and let's say they had 60 games. 35 or 40 of them would have been Pac-Man, Super Pac-Man, Pac-Man Professor. I mean, suddenly it's really a Pac-Man arcade or a Space Invaders arcade.
Right.
So you start
Galaga-ish,
looking, well, you start looking, and out of the 60 games, maybe there were like 10 different games thematically. And I think that caused a lot of the people who had great expectations for this, so we call it new technology, to really advance much quicker. And pinball kind of lingered. Many of the places where video games went in, they replaced pinball. So it wasn't as if there were necessarily new businesses that were starting from scratch, although there were. But pinball really had a foundational base upon which to stay, as well as an audience that wanted to play that. The segmentation of the game-playing public was fascinating. You had people who only played video games, only played kick-punch games, so you had that even further segmented. Only played driving games, sports games. It's the only games that I play on a video game player versus pinball players who would play any pinball, at least once. And then you had that kind of melting pot in the middle, and an amorphous mass of people who were just game players and they played video as well as pinball. So, the company's kind of re-entrenched. Somebody popped a balloon and video games kind of shrunk down to probably where they should have been. And pinball kind of embraced what its roots were, and little by little, games like Comet kind of brought things back. And lo and behold, there was this little upsurge back in the early 1980s where maybe it's not so bad to have pinball. And you had some cornerstone places, Broadway Arcade in New York being one, and others, where you just had this dedicated audience. And again, Papa started taking off, and we were doing leagues, and we were doing the national tournament. Europe was totally different, because Europe never really abandoned pinball per se.
Okay.
It's always been strong since World War II. But it was a slow, steady, progressive growth. So games like F-14 and others from that era, Cyclone in '87, tended to start raising and elevating the bar. An 8-ball deluxe back in 1980, the same. All right, we're getting there. Memory and Recall with the original 8-ball was hugely significant. Number one, it allowed a multiplayer game to play like a single player. It also meant that a company like Gottlieb didn't necessarily need to come out with different iterations of games. We had the 4-player version of El Dorado, and we have the 2-player over here, and we have the Annabelle version over here. I mean, now you kind of consolidate and become a little bit more cost-effective as a manufacturer in terms of what you were doing. So there were a lot of implications back then in terms of technologies and opportunities, and a broader audience now that you were able to reach, a little bit younger as well as a little bit older. So you were still tapping into that core of college age and beyond, and now people started maybe buying a game for their home.
Was that kind of like, so that like the 80s in general, would you say that the demographics grew younger and older?
Yeah.
As the 80s
it
went.
expanded, definitely.
Yeah. And then the same in the 90s, right? I mean, pretty much.
Go back to the late 80s, and now you really have some games of significance. And the early 90s suddenly brought it to a whole new level. Licensed themes. Games that were tapping into whatever was happening in popular culture musically, whether it's TV, movies, and the like. So suddenly the games have personalities. And the inclusion of speech, music, all of that only helped offer a much more enriching experience than what pinball had been before. You know, there's an old Oldsmobile ad, it's not your father's Oldsmobile anymore. Well, those games are no longer your father's pinball anymore. It was like for a new generation, a new era.
Would you say that basically each era, the technology grew and helped adapt to the environment? Like,
well, yeah, pinball tended to either adapt and incorporate whatever the prevailing technologies were.
Because to me, it's like 8-Ball Deluxe is 82, around 82, early 80s.
1980.
80, okay. My parents have a Medusa from 81, the year I was born.
Okay.
And to me, I find that game far more fascinating than any video game. Well, nothing they could do could hold up to a pinball machine, that pinball machine.
Right. Unless you were a video game person.
Right. But I mean, even like how it holds up in time.
Right.
I think.
And that's one of the problems of pinball in terms of its growth. How did today's game stack up to an average person?
Okay.
Who doesn't really know the difference between a Medusa and a Ghostbusters?
Right.
I mean, to them it's a pinball, and it has multiple flippers. It's all red and stuff, and the flippers kind of close. We're talking about Medusa. Targets come up where there weren't any, and they go down. And wow, look at all this stuff. And there's multi-ball. Okay. I mean, we went through an era where everything was a double-level playfield.
Right.
So, you know, the indistinguishable aspect of pinball for the average person became somewhat of a challenge as well as a detriment. So for location owners.
Right.
Why do I have to buy a new game when this one is doing just fantastically well? I'll share, it's a story I've told a few times, of a trade show, and we had Hurricane on the floor, for those who remember Hurricane. And this operator came up and thought that was really good, but he just got the new game, and his location, Cyclone. And is just thrilled at Cyclone. And thinks that Hurricane is really nice, but he has the new game. Well, there's a 4-year discrepancy between the two. So, here's this person, and very, very happy with Cyclone. And here I am showing off, our latest and greatest in the trilogy.
Right.
Of Hurricane. So, you kind of go through cycles like that. And as I said, it's why it's so imperative to keep the games in great shape. You can sell them for fabulous sums of money.
And to me, when you take a game and you clean it and not go too gaudy, but if you do a clear white bulb, you see what the colors of them are supposed to look like,
right,
instead of adding the yellow to it. Not going too wild with the flashers, but you clean it up. Maybe you put a few color ring kit on it for whatever the complementary color is, and then it looks better than new.
Right.
To a lot of people. So I mean, to me, it's the buying trend is up. People are collecting. People are learning to fix them. people that fix them for themselves are becoming techs. At IAAPA, what do you think? How are people responding to pinball that you see walking around? Like, how are they are they getting it? Does it look just fancy to them?
I think they get it. I think it's just a question of whether or not, from a business standpoint, do they get it.
Right, and that's
I
the
think
nature of this bit. That's why we're here, right?
Well, it is, and it's with everything. I mean, I don't care what kind of attraction you have.
Right.
You're hoping that whoever you perceive to be your target audience, that they get it, and it's something that they want to embrace for their business. So with pinball, I think that the fact that it is here and people are playing it and seeing it and touching it is all good. Whether or not it translates into anything of significance sale-wise outside of what the standard audience might be, time will tell.
And how great is IFPA's presence in building the demographics of pinball and the interaction? Because playing together is, to me, what pinball is all about.
Sure.
Like with your friends, your family, strangers. You meet these people at tournaments. They kick your butt. You kick your butt. You get a draw on your record or whatever. They're closer than a lot of our friends.
Sure.
I mean, we had these battles and these memories with them. What do you think of how IFPA has gone the past few years? Where it's going?
Well, obviously, a certain affinity for what I was able to establish with Papa and with Steve Epstein, kind of buying into the motivation as to why I was doing it. And I think when Josh approached me, Steve had sold off the assets of Papa. Something I wasn't aware of, kind of, but I understood why he was doing it. I didn't want him to, but anyway, when Josh approached me, actually at a trade show 10 years ago, because I think it has been 10, could be wrong, maybe it's 8 or 9 or whatever, but give or take. And he said, can you do Papa? And I was like, no. And he said, well, can you resurrect and get the rights for IFPA? Because I was involved with that, admittedly, when I was at Williams Valley. And I was like, why? And he said, because we think that we can do something. We want to start up International Flipper Pinball Association. So I went back to the industry folks and asked and got the rights back. And yeah, I mean, it's incredibly gratifying to me to see where my sons, along with their friends, have been able to take this. It's a realization of what I always envisioned going back to the mid-'70s. To have, I think now it's up to 45, 46, 48,000 players internationally, country directors. I think there's over 3,000 tournaments and events taking place annually. The prize packages with cash machines and whatever else is over $1.5 million. It's staggering. I think it's great. I think that it has given new life to pinball. It's given people a reason to go back to various locations and practice in order to get ready for league night, in order to get ready for a tournament. So I think that it has helped, again, universalize the community in ways that were never possible, technologically speaking. But now with Facebook and all the rest of it, people are able to communicate, compare, contrast. So from that standpoint, I'm pleased. I'm pleased that what I had thought possible actually is realized, and is realized still in my lifetime. And I think that there's no stopping it. The bigger challenge now, and it's going to be, and I know that Zachary has had some corporate sponsorships, is going to be.
Here we go, Roger. We're talking about sponsorships for pinball. Where do you see that going, and where can it possibly go?
Well, I think that as we kind of talked while you were kind of changing over cameras, at one point in time, Ken Lunsford won Super Shooter, drove away with a Datsun 280Z. not an insignificant prize, along with a pinball machine, along with a Pioneer Electronics package and some other stuff. I think that, ideally, you'd like to get some underwriting. I think it'll help. Darts has it. There are other activities that have it, obviously, professional sport-wise and whatever. I think it's really just a question of getting that greater exposure. The current issue of ESPN magazine has, it's a fantastic feature on Robert Gagnon. That's the exposure that we need. Last year at Pinball Expo, the piece that Vice did, HBO. I know that Josh, Zach, and I just did an interview for CBS Sunday Morning, their news show, and whenever it'll air will be whenever it airs. But I think the more that pinball, whether it is in quotes personality-based, event-based, or just pinball holistically, the more that gets out into the mainstream media, I think the better opportunities there are for some companies where it just seems to be a natural fit. Who doesn't have a cell phone?
Right.
Okay, well, let's give away a phone package.
Right.
Who doesn't drive a car? Now, alcohol, tobacco, and other things, no.
No.
But, why can't it be like a Mountain Dew?
Right.
That sponsors
Shoes,
competitions and whatever
clothing,
else. Exactly.
Anything that brandable.
So when you have a marketplace of players and you have captured a certain demographic, then it's really a question of doing the outreach and going to potential sponsors to say, hi, we are going to have the national championships. Would you like it to be the Coca-Cola IFPA National Championship? And I know we've done some things with Gridiron Greats and others, so I think it's going to come. I think the momentum will start being there. I think that Zachary had a few corporate sponsors that had backed him a number of years ago, who just reached out because they had heard about him. So I think that when that happens, we're going to have some unique opportunities to really kind of bring pinball much more into the limelight. And ideally, the dominoes will fall from what we were talking about before, of having more games out in active operation, which obviously helps the manufacturers to place more games and have more people be exposed to them. And all of those things become a cycle. It's what I wound up, creating, if you will, when I started at Williams back in '88. My desire back then was I didn't want there to not be anything about pinball, either in a newspaper, in a magazine, TV, radio. It had to be there constantly. And you'd find new tricks and new ways to elicit somebody's attention and interest and curiosity to make it newsworthy. So I'm hopeful. Yeah, we'll see.
So you're bullish because it's already happening on the microcosm levels. Like in Jacksonville, I'm sponsored by everything from a powder coating place, which makes sense because, hey, everybody has rusty pinball legs,
right?
And they sandblast it and they powder coat it, and you don't want to go, gaudy, but you do complementary colors into movie theaters and locations I have that will, it's you're sponsoring a product you already have that you don't have an ETA when you're selling it in the first place.
Right. Well, take a look.
And you're putting your name on.
Look what Charlie's done with Domino's.
Right.
So I mean, those are great things. And what was it, Pabst beer? I think.
Right.
Is the beer where they've redone Monelli?
Yes.
So I mean, hopefully those kinds of things will start to really kind of take off. So we'll see how it goes.
And who better to negotiate some type of license deals for like branded pinball machines, right?
You never know.
I mean, never know. Have you had anything in the works or tried to negotiate anything?
I mentioned we were off camera for what we had done with Papa early on. I mean, we had Subway sandwiches, and Subway was a sponsor. We had Ben & Jerry's ice cream back then when they were just breaking in. I know with Frank Sininsky's help, and who's an operator and a very well-known person within the coin-operated amusement game industry, Frank had arranged something for a trip. We gave away a flight to somewhere to the championship of Papa. So I think that those kinds of things absolutely do exist. Am I doing anything now currently? No. No, not on behalf of anybody yet.
But if someone said, "Hey, can you help us negotiate this deal,
Sure.
the right deal?" Because
I would
negotiating takes
I would
it's a
gladly
knack.
deal with that. Yep.
Well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you'd like to tell pinball players or
Just to continue playing pinball, support it, and have some fun.
Thank you very much.